I want to talk real quickly about gun control because my opinions on it have changed radically in the last few months. You see, in the past, I was very concerned with school shootings, with sort of the rampant everyday violence on the streets of America. And the idea in my mind was that the people with guns are, they're committing murders, and murders are bad, and let's not have that go on. So take away the guns, and there will be fewer murders on the streets. But things began to change for me under the Trump administration. I realized that guns have a certain political salience in the American political sphere, where people who are actually armed get listened to more by the government than people who are not armed. And that is a ridiculous fact of America, but it's just the way it goes. Political power and an armed citizenry are inextricably linked, at least in America, at least in this current point in time. And then there's the wording of the Second Amendment. It says, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's a terribly worded amendment, but basically the way I read it, it's that an armed populace is necessary to ensure the freedom of the people. And this is the Second Amendment. The First Amendment is the freedom to organize, the freedom of speech, the freedom of being in America. That's the most important right that we're trying to protect. And the second right is this is how it gets protected. And now that we're living under a political administration that is doing restrictions on free speech and free organizing, removing due process, it seems that the Second Amendment is suddenly relevant again. It makes me really depressed. But the fact is, it's right there in the Constitution. Americans need to arm themselves. You need to arm yourself. And a couple of weeks ago when I first had this idea, I went down to a shooting range, learned how to use a Glock. I already own a shotgun, and I'm a terrible shot. I often look at my shotgun and I think that skeet should nest near it because there's no chance a skeet gets shot with it. But I'm getting better, and I've now learned how to use a firearm, and I don't like the reality where that's necessary. No one wants to be in a gunfight, but we have to acknowledge that owning guns is a critical part of being an American. And so that's how my opinions have changed pretty radically just in the last few months. And the evidence of tyranny, of government tyranny, is everywhere. Literally last night, 1 block from my house, there was an ice raid. I was just coming back from a 30-mile bike ride, and right there were 15, 20 ICE agents in sort of odd uniforms. They weren't actually wearing normal ICE uniforms. They were wearing sort of much more downgraded ICE gear, but they were out arresting people 1 block from my house. I'm not saying that anyone should be getting into firefights with ICE agents. What I'm saying is that the government is using its power illegitimately. They're denying people due process. And should there ever be a point where an armed citizenry is necessary, it's important for those citizens to already be armed. And the last point I want to make on this is that there's legislation going on in Denver right now, which I initially supported. It was to change the firearm regulations in Denver to make them more restrictive. Specifically, it was against semi-automatic pistols and magazines that can be removed and easily inserted into a firearm. And those seem like great ideas if you want to stop a school shooting and make it harder to do a school shooting. I get it, rational. However, the situation has changed, and having just learned how to use a pistol, it's pretty clear that if it comes down to a moment where people are actually shooting one another, you do not want to be the guy armed with the 6-shooting revolver against the person with the semi-automatic weapon, which they already own. So my opinion, even on that local voting measure, has changed radically. You may not agree with me. You may think this is a dumb, short-sighted view and that I am embracing some sort of violent ideology that is distasteful. And maybe you're right. Let me know down in the comments what you're doing to help stave off the tyranny of the American government.